Welcome back. Welcome back to the Charles Butler Show. We have with us this morning Mr. Garst. He's Director of Policy and Communications at the Center for Prosperity, located in Washington, D.C. To the show, Brian, we're going to talk this morning about the International Criminal Court, and that's the court that Barack Obama wants to place the U.S. soldiers under so that we could be part of the world community and be treated like the rest of the world and face charges from this politicized body that is influenced by politics, by inadequate enforcement policies, and most of all, they lack any real fact-finding ability. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, and you really got to the heart of the matter. I recently had a paper come out looking into the International Criminal Court and its history and how it's performed since it came into existence over a decade ago, and many of the criticisms of the court prior to its creation have borne out, and it is indeed very political. Mm-hmm. You have a body that's essentially made up of international countries that, in many cases, don't have the same adherence to the rule of law that the United States has, for instance.
Well, of course not.
And they're trying to achieve political ends through this organization.
Well, yeah, they do. And, your article, your white paper, I read most of it, and I can tell you, they're the same things that we talked about 10 years ago when, the world community tried to force President Bush to accept our soldiers being tried at the ICC. But it's always interesting to me how these countries in the world always focus on America. They always want to come after us. They always want to punish us. But we're the only ones that they come to when they want military aid, when they want someone to come and stop the aggression. They come and get the Americans, but then they want to punish our troops. It's like this American Sniper movie. Could you believe what happened at University of Michigan, which, by the way, is my alma mater? I called the president's office because I couldn't believe that these little rogue Muslim students are out here demanding that, American Sniper not be shown because he was killing Iraqi civilians. No, they were enemy combatants, you stupid little. My question to the president was, how did these dummies even get into the university?
Yeah, well, and that was particularly outrageous, and so is much of what's going on at our universities these days. But, and you're exactly right. These are the same arguments that we heard under Bush, and thankfully he did not join the court, and you worry about the Obama administration's intentions in that regard. And now, with the news going on that, I don't know if you heard just the other day, the court said that they would not try any cases with regard to ISIS because they claim they don't have jurisdiction, even though many of the individuals involved come from nations that are signed on to the treaty. But they are very interested in pursuing cases in Palestine, potentially.
Well, Palestine, Israel, Afghanistan, Iraq, but all against the Americans, not against the people who are setting off IEDs or the women who are walking into groups of American troops and trying to blow them up, or the Iraqi and Afghan troops who are working with Americans and turning, shooting American troops in the back who are trying to help them.
Yeah, and it's interesting in its entire history that the ICC has never taken up a terrorism case. Obviously,
there's a reason for that.
Taking up anything against the United States allows them any jurisdiction, but it's a matter where their focus has been rather curious.
Well, it's not, to me, it's not curious, and I'll tell you why, Brian. These people are very anti-American. They're like most immigrants today. You know, these Latino immigrants here in America are not interested in being Americans. They're not interested in assimilating. They come here and they speak their language and they want to be Mexican and they just want our money. The same way in the Middle East. These poor countries like Afghanistan. How many billions of dollars have we wasted in Afghanistan? And how many billions of dollars did Karzai walk away with? We made Karzai a multimillionaire. That's all he got as president of Afghanistan. And we stood there with this guy, brought him in from France, put him as head of the Afghan country, paid him millions of dollars, and all he talked about was how bad America is, how bad the U.S. is. Get out of my country. That's what he told us. Get out of my country.
Yeah, and you wonder what effect all efforts have truly had, and you could say the same thing about the ICC in certain regards. They tend to go into a situation and often make it worse than when they entered, and you wonder how it's going to impact the peace process now in Israel if their opponents feel emboldened and feel like they can achieve victory through international law, so-called, whether or not they will be interested in pursuing the peace process. And we've seen that throughout the court's history, when they went in and tried to prosecute the leader of Sudan. It actually not only made him more popular at home, but it emboldened the rebel groups to step away from a process that had been underway because they felt like they could achieve their goals with this other group coming in and smiting their enemies, so to speak.
Well, what are okay, you guys pointed this out. What are they saying on the Hill? I'm sure you're talking to people on the Hill about this. So what are folks saying up there about this ICC thing? We're not taking this serious, are we? It's amazing to me. What's amazing to me is that we have a president who constantly tries to undermine America. We know that the UN doesn't work. We know that things like the ICC doesn't work. The Hague is barely performing. That's the only court that I've seen that has really stepped up in past decades has been the Hague.
Yeah, nobody within the U.S. is necessarily taking the issue too seriously. I think the president, as you mentioned, he kind of used it as a potential threat to Israel to get his way in the process, force them to negotiate in the manner that he sees fit. I think, obviously Israel is taking it very seriously at this stage, and they've been asking certain countries not to fund the ICC. I think they recognize first and foremost that it's a political body and that any political body is necessarily concerned about where it's going to get its next round of funding from. But they haven't been successful in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what's the status of the ICC? Because as I was out here doing a little research on it, I don't have much information. What's the status of the ICC? And by the way, where is it located?
I believe it's in The Hague too. As a whole, right now the status of the ICC is that it's trying desperately to find its legitimacy. Yeah, it's been heavily criticized for an excessive focus on Africa, which is the only continent where it's ever brought any cases, largely because everyone else has political connections and can prevent that from happening. You recently had 50-plus countries wanted Syria brought before the court, but, they have the protection of China and Russia on the Security Council, so that didn't happen. So the ICC, I think, is looking for a situation where it can get involved that's outside of Africa so they can say, see, we're legitimate now. We're not only attacking African countries.
If we're talking about attacking African countries, what about Libya? What about Yemen? What about Egypt? What about Boko Haram? What about Mali and all the attacks against Christians in those countries?
Yeah, I mean, they have a situation open in Mali, but they haven't pursued any cases there. And it's true. I mean, it's a narrow subset of Africa, even that they're interested in, and that's again because of political influence. Because the Middle Eastern nations will at least stick together and resist in a way that the African Union necessarily won't or hasn't. Mm-hmm. And then they're again not exactly looking at the situation we are.
Okay. Well, so Brian, what's the most significant case that we would probably know that where the ICC was involved? Was it with Gaddafi?
Well, I think they started to get involved with Gaddafi. It didn't go anywhere before that was resolved on its own. But most of the situations are not ones that Americans would be particularly familiar with. Because the major incidents they haven't been involved in. The terrorist countries they haven't done anything. So.
Well, I noticed that you were talking about acts of genocide, and the length of the genocide since World War II. The Sudan, they've had killing going on in the Sudan since 2002, 2003. They've had genocide. The ICC, the UN ruled that it's not genocide going on in the Sudan. And Colin Powell went to the UN and said, well, what else would you call it? And they said, well, they're having a civil war within the country. No, it's genocide. The Arabs were slaughtering the blacks.
Yeah, and again, and the problems you have with the UN are basically the same problems you have with the court, which is that it's made up of the same countries with the same motivations. And one of the things I found in my paper is that one of the claims for having an ICC was that it would supposedly have a deterrent effect on bad actors, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I looked at genocide as one of the primary things it's supposed to deal with, and there's really no change in the trend line so far. I mean, granted, you're talking about a relatively small period of time, and a dozen or so years, but other academic studies have not shown any significant deterrent effect from the court, and that's because they're not pursuing any cases in significant fashion. Well,
look, let's come back and let's wrap up when we come back talking about the ICC and its ineffectiveness. It's Freedom Friday, Charles Butler Show. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Charles Butler. Okay, welcome back to the Charles Butler Show. I'm here with Mr. Brian Garst from the Freedom for Prosperity Institute, and we're talking about the issues that affect you, and we're also talking about the ICC. The ICC, boy, I tell you. So, hey, Brian, thanks for getting up and being with us today. Brian is the Director of Government Affairs at the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, CFP. And what's your website out there, Brian?
It's freedomandprosperity.org.
Okay, freedomprosperity.org. Okay, great. And so let's see here. Where do we go from here?
Well, right now the case that they're looking at in Israel and Palestine is in the preliminary stages. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they go beyond that. Most of them don't historically. One potential wrinkle is that the nations can refer cases to the court. They cannot. They can refer situations, but they cannot refer cases which are targeted at individuals. So the court could end up going after Palestinians if they honestly look at the evidence and for instance, and on the rocket attacks and other things. So that is an option that they might, in fact, the whole process might backfire on the Palestinians, which have been pushing for this very hard for the last few years. But whether or not that happens is an open question. And of course, the court has no enforcement power on its orders. So if they do come down on Israel, Israel could really just kind of tell them to go pound sand if they want. Obviously, the members of the court are supposed to be obliged to carry out their orders if a wanted individual is in their territory, but that doesn't include the United States.
Well, one of the stipulations that the Iraqis wanted to implement if we came back into the country was that we come under the jurisdiction of the ICC. And I thought that was the craziest thing since Looney Tunes. I get tired of American troops being exposed to not only right now we have people who can join our military who are not even citizens. How does that work? It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. These politicians need to be made to go and serve themselves with the gays and the non-citizens and the transgenders, and they've taken something that happened in the 40s and tried to make it a civil rights issue with all of this craziness that's going on in the military today. And then our troops that can't go fight. I mean, Barack's rules of engagement may as well have been written by Daffy Duck.
Yeah, in the United States, we were particularly wary at the time of any potential jurisdiction from the ICC, in large part because they don't. There's no real due process at the ICC. It's not like what we're used to in the United States. There's no trial by jury. The standards for evidence are extremely lax, and so we were legitimately concerned that there might be political-based prosecution of U.S. troops.
Well, political, they're always, because at the end of the day, everyone's jealous of America, including this president of the United States. He does not see America like we do. But, it's very hard for Westerners and especially Americans to understand what's going on in the rest of the world. Do you find that to be true, Brian?
Yeah, well, you have very, very different systems at play, so people aren't always used to seeing the different contexts and understanding what stories mean from certain other areas. That's absolutely true.
Well, and I think that's why there's no outcry. There's no one really, coming or understanding what this thing is all about. Like what we're talking about, people just don't get it. They're just so detached from it. They don't really get it.
Yeah, and it's not relevant to the day-to-day lives of most Americans. But you have these situations where the U.S. and I think it was absolutely the right decision not to get involved in the courts. But then you kind of run the danger of all the other nations that do get involved, having a worse perspective, and then they just kind of run off, and the whole thing runs amok, and we turn around. There's this big behemoth that we have to deal with.
Okay, well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
We got to run. Okay. Mr. Brian Garst. We'll be back with Liz Peek.